we've now gone through all these different tokens, and we kind of compare and contrast sort of the traditional financial space and economic space with the digital space. And so we can now look at NFTs and DAOs and coins, and look at how they alter capital raise practices. So what we normally see in traditional venture capital is the early investors, they'll do something that's called a SAFT, it's called a simple agreement for equity. They might get a 10x return in 5 years, right? This is kind of a typical kind of first round. Then you'll go into like a Series A or some kind of larger round, and the early investors get diluted. Then you go into another series of a round, and you get additional dilution over and over again. What's happening in the Web3 space is, and this is profound, these Web3 projects have two cap tables. They have an equity cap table and they have a token cap table. And it's important to think about it that way, because they're actually creating the top VCs, and now many of the sort of lead, following VCs, they're doing a whole lot of financial analysis on what this means, because the tokens generally, half will go to the community, another quarter will go into the treasury, so that the community now has funds to spend, and then another quarter will go to the early investors. So they're getting equity via SAFE, and they're getting tokens from what's called a simple agreement for future tokens. And the same way we talked about in the previous session about some of the really cool use cases of NFTs, the ability to fractionalize the ownership of large capital assets, the ability to move them faster throughout an economic cycle. Selling a building to 1,000 slices in 3 days versus to one person in 3 months. What's happening is we can now use these tokens; they're really liquid, and so the early investors are able to make a return, at least their initial investment. In some cases, they're making a 10x return on these tokens if they can generate enough demand for them prior to the launch. That there's not enough of them. There's more demand than there are tokens. So the early investors, they get equity, and they get the tokens that they can liquidate after they're issued. And what's fascinating is in this space, generally speaking, you can't get early investors until you have that product market fit, right? In traditional investing, they want you to be here. They want to come in when you're at that growth phase, where you've proven product market fit. You've got products, you've got customers, you've got metrics. So what happens to startups through this process? Well, they starve. So in Web3, what's happening is these early investors are investing in equity and tokens on a white paper. Some of them are as short as 15 pages, and they're raising $10 million in equity that they then turn around and raise, $30, $50 million in tokens. It's fascinating because they've got two cap tables. And this allows these early innovators to fund projects early in the process, before the product's built, before you've proven product market fit. And if they're successful with the token offering, well, this is really interesting. They're getting equity plus the tokens. And because it's the community funding the next phase of the development of the project, there's no equity dilution. There's no equity available to anyone else. And then if they launch a platform, in many cases, there'll be transaction fees. There'll be ways of incentivizing behaviors and penalizing behaviors to earn revenue. We call that tokenomics. And you can, generally speaking, you can now raise an order of magnitude more money. In some cases, we have hundreds of millions of dollars being raised at this round, like ICOs. Again, no equity dilution, no equity available to anyone else. And so what happens is, we haven't seen this yet, but when one of these projects gets sold, it's really the only early investors that will make any money. The token holders that came in here and here, their token may go up and may go down. No one knows. And so what's happening is these early investors, the people that come in and invest early in the process, go back to our product management picture, that invest here. Traditional investing says, well, I like lower risk and I want to invest at a later date. That was fine with old school VC and old school capital raising, but not with Web3. not what we're seeing yet. Now, a couple of years from now, as these projects evolve, who knows? We can kind of predict that some of them that struggle may turn to raise more equity, but then you got to ask yourselves, why would you want to invest in them if they struggle to build a community that could fund them? This gives you some really interesting things are going to evolve over the next 3 to 5 years. And with that, I'm going to kind of pause, and I think we're going to just shift to some questions, Aaron, and then in the last 5 minutes, we'll come back to this topic a bit.